Hello and welcome to Lead Presents School EdTech, Solving India's Core Education Problem, partnered by ET Now. Education has been hit particularly hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, with upwards of 1.5 billion students out of school and countrywide school closures in nearly 200 nations. As a result of which, many EdTech startups emerged in an attempt to bridge this learning deficit, and the role of schools themselves was in fact sharply called into question. So now with schools beginning to reopen, how must they evolve in a post-pandemic scenario? It's a complex question that deserves to be approached from a 360-degree perspective. Unfortunately, I'm joined by a panel of subject matter experts to help me do just that. We have with us Sumit Mehta, co-founder and chief executive officer, LEAD; Ramanan Ramanathan, former and first mission director, Atal Innovation Mission and additional secretary, Niti Aayog; Gauri Gupta, lead education technology, Central Square Foundation; and Satish Bomala, owner, Great Woods High School, Hyderabad. With that, Sumit, I'd love to kick off the conversation with you. So when it comes to the pandemic and school education, what are some of the most critical lessons learned?
Well, as they say, it takes a crisis to reveal our true nature. And I would say there were more revelations than learning. And the big thing that got revealed was that we don't value the rights of our children. I mean, the fact that for 20 months we've kept children away from school is just a travesty of their rights, despite all epidemiological evidence to say that students should have been the first ones to get back to schools. And we still have a situation where malls are open, cinema halls are open, but all children are still not back in school. So I think that was one big learning. The second one was that we definitely value exams more than education. The fact that we prioritize class 10th and class 12th board exam classes to the exclusion of over 200 million students in other classes just revealed that essentially we are an exam society, we are not an education-focused society. I think if there is a third lesson to be learned here, it was that schools cannot persist with status quo anymore. If they continue with the traditional practices, where teachers were completely unprepared, curriculum and pedagogy was age-old, and school systems were not prepared to handle any disruption, really we have to reboot our school systems if we have to be ready for the future. To my mind, there are a lot of operational issues came up. There were a lot of access issues came up of data and device. But if you truly ask me, I think these were the three big ones which stand out and which we have to attack as a country if we have to move forward in education.
Absolutely. And, I'd love to come to you now, Gauri, building on some of Sumit's observations. So broadly speaking, how do you assess the impact of this extended school closure on a child's mental, physical, social, and perhaps most importantly, psychological development?
Great question, Pooja. Thank you for that. I think the pandemic came as a shock to the Indian education system. I think no one was ready for the pandemic. But the system demonstrated commitment, resourcefulness, and sense of urgency in responding to the crisis. Actually, most states in India instituted some form of digital learning immediately to ensure that student learning continued during the lockdown. The education response of states focused on providing widespread access very quickly. Limited internet and phone penetration, especially in rural areas, required the states to deploy high-tech, low-tech, as well as no-tech solutions in order to transmit quality content to large sections of the population. For example, to reach learners with lack of access to smartphones, many states such as Himachal, UP broadcast audio-visual content of television. WhatsApp also emerged as a dominant channel for dissemination of high-quality learning resources. As on the ground, picture of both the government as well as private response to school closure showed us that 80% of the children received grade-appropriate textbooks after the closure, and 35% of the children received other learning material, and I'm quoting ASAR 2021. However, given the scale and diversity of the Indian context, despite these measures, there has been massive pandemic-induced learning losses in all children, irrespective of their social economic background.
Absolutely. And Ramanan, I'd love to come to you now, switching gears a bit and taking a look at the topic from a different perspective. How have school closures impacted the schools themselves?
Yeah, indeed. The COVID-19 crisis has been unprecedented in terms of its impact. And especially at the school level, we have 1.4 million schools. We have more than 640,000 secondary schools and higher secondary schools. And so that's a huge population of our young demographic dividend that we always talk about being affected by this pandemic. At the same time, I would also like to bring to attention that this pandemic has enabled us to think very innovatively, both at a school level as well as from a student point of view. Technology is changing the way we are experiencing the world on a daily basis, and it's experiencing the way we are experiencing the world, and the world is experiencing us. And that was also true for most of the schools. They started leveraging technology to the hilt.
Phenomenal and very well summarized. And I'd love to come to you now, Satish, and I welcome your perspective on this next question. So in the new normal we now find ourselves in, what are best practices that schools need to embrace to ensure that safety comes first without compromising on quality of education?
On this, after the post-pandemic, what we are seeing practically on the ground, children are they have learned it very fast how they need to be careful to deal with the pandemic situation and what's going on out there. That's what we have really observed with the children. They have a little bit transformed by seeing others. So literally for their in their lives, it's the first time for them. They have not seen anything before like that. Even in our generations, we have not seen anything at this point. So when we have reopened, we have observed more than us. Yes, they are really careful and they are doing it. And from school end, we are trying to encourage them and trying to explain them what is the current situation, how we need to proceed further. So that's what we are trying to do in a very frequent basis. At the same time, schools are going to change very soon. Very soon, they are going to change. We need to travel parallelly using the technology, and with that we can enhance the quality of education at schools.
Sir, I'd love to zoom out for a moment actually, and I'd love to come to Sumit with my next question, because I think it's critical we ask that, is it imperative that schools reopen at the earliest?
If you ask me, I think that's the wrong question to ask, because I think when we ask whether it is the right time to reopen schools, we're actually admitting that closing schools was the right decision. I think the right question to ask is, what are the conditions in which we should keep schools closed?
Sure.
Because the default has to be that schools have to be open. You look at any other developed country, which puts education as a priority, schools have been open the first and closed the last. Right. And in India, it's been the opposite. So I would ask, what are the conditions, specific conditions in which a particular class or a particular school should be kept closed? Otherwise, the default is that we should give back students their right to go to a school, and all schools should be kept open unless absolutely necessary. We cannot let our fears overpower our aspirations. We cannot let all the WhatsApp forwards about third, fourth, fifth wave overpower what is epidemiologically proven. So I think that's a question to ask. And if you ask me from parents, I guess before they expect something from the post-pandemic era, I would just request parents to look at evidence and less at forwards, because this parent hesitation of sending their children back to school is a metro and high income phenomena.
Sure, absolutely. And Gauri, I'd love to come to you now, because safety aside, as schools reopen, what else do they need to be most mindful of in your view?
So I think the pandemic did one big thing, right, which was to galvanize the hundreds and thousands of parents and siblings who were earlier never involved in their child's learning to actually become agents of teaching and learning. Even for children where both the parents had less than 5 years of schooling, 55% of these received some support at home, showing the value that parents were given to education. And this is something this is in some ways a force that we need to retain. And technology, the use of technology, the continued use of home learning as an important tool to not only address the learning loss that has happened, but to augment the teaching and learning that will happen in school is going to be critical. Right? We've all spoken about the fact that technology can create a huge digital divide, but it can also be a great equalizer. Right? So the quality of education, which we all worry about, right, which is not necessarily great in affordable private schools or in government schools, is something that can be addressed through the use of technology.
Sorry, before you ask your question, I think on the
Yes.
point that Gauri mentioned
Please.
about technology,
Yeah.
I just want to point out that we've got to be mindful about the fact that we're talking about all of India and not just about the India which has access to devices and data. And there is clear data which shows that uh, the fact that technology access to data and device is a barrier keeps out close to 200 million students out of it.
Right.
So unless we have a real plan, and that's why I keep insisting that we should not get over enamored with the power of technology, because the reality is that for most students in the country, school is the place where learning happens. And school is not only the place where learning happens, also with the midday meal scheme, nutrition happens.
Right.
And it also keeps away a lot of students in the low income families away from abuse and child labor. And we cannot ignore that, and get over enamored by the power of technology. I just want us to be mindful that any solution we think has to be applicable to all 270 million kids and not just the top end which has access to data and device.
And with that, I switch gears and come over to you, Ramanan, because our country is, of course, home to upwards of 270 million students. So has there been a silver lining of sorts to this pandemic, specifically in the context of education reform?
Yeah, I have slightly different points of view. I believe that technology has to be leveraged to the hilt in India. See, India is a very large country. We have 715 districts. We have 650,000 villages. We have over 115 of them are aspirational districts, which are at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of basic access to healthcare, education, clean drinking water, sanitation. Our current educational systems have been very traditional in the way they have been approaching. And while it has served us well to date, going forward, we need to have a much more innovative nation. We need to create job creators of the future. We cannot sustain 1.3 billion people with our 150 million young students coming out and not being aware of the latest trends that are affecting the world and upon which solutions of the world are being developed. So technology has to become an integral part of any solution that we are looking at in India. And NEP 2020 precisely talks about all of that. And I think the government has taken a great initiative in rolling this out. Now the pandemic has also brought into sharp focus that unless you have this capability of leveraging technology in learning, should the next pandemic arise, should the next climate change problem happen, how do you ensure that people, life can continue and education can continue?
Well, thank you, sir. And that actually makes for an excellent segue to my next question, which is to you, Satish. Do you believe that schools will revert back to their pre-pandemic mode of operating? Your take.
Moving back to again to normal, new normal, certainly it's easy, provided if schools like me, like as we are using some platform from lead schools, so which is helping me in a very good way. So my work and results are very fast right now. To patch up my learning gaps with the students and using this technology as to enhance and speed up the work. So how we do this? See, with the help of this technology, so the deliverables are very fast.
And I'd like to take the conversation in a different direction now, and I come to you with my question, Sumit. How can and should schools leverage this pandemic, this once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, to essentially reinvent themselves?
I think that's a great question. Every crisis is an opportunity. You can actually get fearful of the crisis and just freeze, or you can use the opportunity to reinvent. And my sense is that this is a seminal opportunity for schools in India to really reinvent themselves. My sense is that transformation will happen in areas that the other panelists have spoken about, because like everyone else is saying, and I agree, that technology is a means to an end. It is not an end in itself. And I think if we use technology correctly to transform schools, that will be a big outcome. And what are the areas in which that transformation can happen? Let's look at the classroom. So far, historically, all the schools that the five of us went to had a teacher standing in front of a blackboard and delivering a 40-minute lecture, and students were listening, and half the students were looking out of the window. And I think technology can empower that teacher to deliver a multimodal form of learning, which is a combination of audiovisual, kinesthetic, and enable the teacher to deliver exemplar plans at the level of world-class teachers. So technology has the power to make an average teacher in India operate at the level of a world-class teacher. That's how classroom can transform. Now let's look at the school level. Traditionally, schools have been very linear. You teach something, then you assess the students, and then you give them a report card. And that's like a badge on their forehead to move forward. But if a student has scored 60%, that means 40% is not known. So how do you remediate? So schools have to move from linear to spiral, and technology can help because they can have the data of the students at a very granular learning indicator level. That data can inform the teacher on what remedial action to take, and that data can even tell the principal so that she or he can monitor the school overall, right? So that the school level technology can actually make an impact.
And Gauri, I'd love to come to you now and get your view on this transformation that Sumit has just referenced. So what role will the intersection of teachers, technology and innovation play in schools of the future?
No, it's an excellent question, and I couldn't agree more than what Sumit has already said. But in my mind, right, as we think of these interactions, I think what we call blended learning is going to become inevitable, and there is a need to seamlessly extend learning from home to school and empower students to problem solve independently as well. And as schools reopen in the process, it will also be critical to assess the learning levels of the student, to gauge the learning loss and ensure learning recovery. By reinforcing concepts which have been taught in classrooms, at-home learning and a hybrid model of study could play an important role in remediation and transition back to school. Teachers as well must be supported and engaged in this new way of learning, as they are a peg around whom this whole learning process actually revolves. We must ensure that we do not lose this momentum. And parents, schools, teachers must all come together in ensuring that quality education is being delivered to all children, both in school and at home, in order to ensure that this learning loss that we have all faced during the pandemic is mitigated at the earliest.
Lovely. And Sumit, I'd love to come to you now, because LEAD is, of course, transforming schools into tech-based centers of excellence that embrace an immersive learning experience using a multimodal approach. So what are the various elements in play here?
Well, I guess as all the panelists have already spoken, that schools are complex ecosystems. So it's not only about the student, it's not only about the teacher, it's also about the principal, the school owner and the parents. And I think because they are complex ecosystems, any system which is designed to transform schools has to be very first principle based and has to take a system approach. So if I have to explain what LEAD is trying to do in very simple terms, if you look at a student, they are impacted by three things: who is teaching them, what is being taught, and how is it being taught. So if I look at who is teaching them, technology has to empower the teacher. And in our country, where, like Satish sir was saying, there are teachers who have done graduation, who've taken the B.Ed program, but when you look at their classroom execution and you compare them with some of the best in the world, there are miles to go. And the traditional teacher training model is broken because the translation from teacher training to in-class practice is very poor. So the first role is, how do we empower teachers to really teach at an excellent level using technology? And that's one part of what LEAD does. Second is, what is taught? So the curriculum itself has to undergo a transformation, because if I teach English as a subject, where students read a story and then answer the book back questions, you're really testing for memory. You're not really building reading comprehension skills.
Right.
So the curriculum has to really get transformed. And like Mr. Raman was saying, I think NEP is a great guideline now on which we can continue to transform our curriculum.
Very inspiring there. And with that, I'd love to come to closing comments now, and I'll pose this question to each of my panelists. And if I could ask that you do some crystal ball gazing, if you will. How do you believe the school of 2030 will vary from schools as we know them today? And Gauri, if I could please start with you.
Wow. So, I I imagine a world, right, where there will be no barriers between school and home. I imagine a world where, there is going to be seamless integration between, books, between tech, between, literally, physical forms of learning, etc. And I also imagine a world where all the stakeholders, right, in the teaching learning process, whether it is teachers, parents, students, school owners, are all aligned to one common objective, which is increasing learning for students, right, versus many, many other objectives that we are all that they work towards.
Sure. And Ramanan, your take?
We are in a digital world, and digital world is going to be the default. So my crystal ball gazing is every school and every class will become a global school and a global class. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that you are connected to the rest of the world. You will have access to teachers from all over the world. You will have access to best practices from across the world, and you'll have access to content from across the world. And therefore, the future classroom has to become a global classroom, leveraging digital technology to the help, but also combining blended learning, because blended learning is very important in the course of a child's growth.
Satish, your final words, sir.
Yes, Ramnan sir rightly said, it is already started. We are from ground level, we are trying to align ourselves with the competition with the help of the technology. And yes, many things already started transforming at our end. And yes, like from here to next 15 years, if we see on a forecast basis, we need to train our children, our middle class children, and we need to focus more on them, which are at large population, which we need to do a lot of research on this particular aspect. Thank you.
Sumit, I'd love your take as well.
I think crystal ball gazing is always hazardous because the future unfolds in myriad ways. But if you ask me, I think in 2030 it'll be great if all children, irrespective of their accident of birth, get access to a great quality school in their vicinity. And the purpose of school really grows from just exam preparation and exam scores to what Gandhiji said. I think the purpose of education is to prepare capable adults who can earn a living, responsible citizens who can contribute to the nation, and good human beings who can live in harmony with the earth. And I think if all schools can actually do that by 2030, that will be great. And the only way that can happen is, and I agree with Ramanan, is if schools will get out of the school building and students get access to a network of schools, because their access to resources is not restricted to what is locally available, their local teacher, their local content. They have access to global content, global teachers. That can only become possible if schools become network entities, so that a school in Kadapa can connect with a school in Los Angeles to a school in Delhi.
Well, I believe that makes for a wonderful note upon which to bring this conversation to a close. And with that, our special feature Lead Presents School EdTech, Solving India's Core Education Problem, partnered by ET Now, concludes. We trust that you found the insights shared of tremendous value. Thanks for watching.